Welcome to the Underground, the Steel City Underground, the black and gold standard for Pittsburgh Steelers coverage. Now, here are your hosts, Joe Kuzma and Brian E. Roach.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Steel City Underground podcast. My name is Joe Kuzma, and I'm joined today by my colleague, my usual partner in crime here, my tag team partner, Jawbreaker, Brian E. Roach. Mr. Jawbreaker, we were talking about nicknames not too long ago in the back rooms, and seeing as we learned something new about you, why don't you tell everyone else?
Oh, sure. Yeah, that was my nickname in high school. I earned it as a freshman.
So because you were breaking jaws?
Yeah, I hit a kid.
Oh, like intentionally?
Well, yeah, he was a jerk, and he was messing with me, and I got into a fight. I hit him, and unfortunately, his jawbone was not as solid as it should have been.
Oh, it got in the way of your fist?
And that got in the way of my fist, and that moniker followed me throughout my high school career. And is in most of my yearbooks.
That's hilarious. I told everybody in the back rooms a story that's not safe for work and cannot be repeated here, but it was still kind of funny. Let's just say a star football player, meathead, musclehead guy, I was a junior or senior in high school, accidentally groped me looking for his scientific calculator that was missing and thought that everyone was playing a prank on him. And that became a thing that spread very quickly, as do things in those type of high school environments. So is social media, I think. I think a lot of that, you get on Twitter and some of these things fly around, people just, they talk about things, and that's kind of what we're going to go on this today, is things that, Steelers fans still dwell on. But before, I really get to that, I just kind of want to throw something out here, more current event type news, Brian.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of like things that spread like rapid fire and everything like that. I think we mentioned this. I mean, we may not mention this because when we originally did the quarterback show, I do think that Brogan Roback was still the fourth quarterback, and then the Steelers had released him and picked up Devlin Hodges, who we talked about very briefly. I love the small college. I like the 1AA type guys. I still can't get away from 1AA. I like it way better because then I'm like, what's the acronym? Is it FBS? Is it FCS? So he's FCS guy, Samford, a great passer. Does anyone really believe that no matter who it is, whether it's Devlin Hodges or just throw a name in there, aside from like Peyton Manning or somebody that's like a legit franchise quarterback, has a chance to leapfrog Josh Dobbs or Mason Rudolph? A completely healthy roster. The Steelers are only going to keep 3 quarterbacks. If they didn't keep Landry Jones last year, there's no way that they're going to have another guy. So when you see some of this stuff floating around on the internet, this guy might be fun to watch a little bit, but you're going to see him in camp, and that's about it, because I don't think he's even going to get snaps. The Steelers traditionally never even gave the fourth guy like snaps. Who was the kid that was from I shouldn't say kid because he was probably like 23, 24 years old. Kid to me, definitely. I'm a kid to you too, Brian. But where was he from? Yep. Tennessee, maybe? Taj Boyd. When they brought Taj Boyd in, and he never threw a ball. And then there was this other guy, Schlessler or Schlesinger or something that they had as a fourth guy, and he never did. Yeah. And then Dustin Vaughn only got in there.
One year they brought in a kid from Cincy.
Yeah, there was one from Cincinnati. Yeah. Brendan Kay, I believe was his name.
Yeah, I think that's right, yeah.
And then I'm trying to think. He just Dustin Vaughn only got snaps because Gradkowski got hurt, and maybe Landry was banged up or some like thing like that. Maybe I got my dates messed up, and then it was Landry got hurt. Maybe they had Dobbs already, or no. That was like Kobe Hamilton, because I remember him completely overthrowing him. And some of that isn't even the quarterback's problem. These quarterbacks, I mean, they're getting a look in the NFL because they are good, but the thing is, the timing and the rapport and that just isn't there because they don't get enough snaps. They're not being invested in, because it doesn't appear that of the trim down from 90 to 53 that they're going to be a member of the roster afterward. And I just kind of want to point out that the silliness that I've seen in the last few days over talking about the fourth quarterback, because we're all reaching for things to talk about in June because there's nothing going on, I'll admit it, but they have Josh Dobbs and Mason Rudolph, 2 guys who can legitimately try and vie to be the next guy in Pittsburgh. Let's say Ben Roethlisberger only plays another year or two. Who do you think they're going to invest the time in? Devlin Hodges? Or we're going to see maybe a legitimate backup battle between Mason Rudolph and Josh Dobbs when we get to training camp and preseason. I wouldn't be surprised if each of those guys gets to play an entire half of football themselves. I don't really see where, we're always saying knock on wood. This is always with an asterisk. If everyone's healthy, I don't see a situation where Hodges even gets to throw the ball.
Yeah, look, we need the following thing to occur. We need there to be a backup battle. Mason Rudolph needs to develop enough that he pushes Josh Dobbs. Josh Dobbs needs to develop enough that he pushes back. We need those two guys to be priming, to be ready, to be growing in their professional skill sets. And if we don't have that, then we have a problem. Look, I think if Delvin Hodges is making a name for himself, that's great for him. But, man, that's a problem for the Steelers because it means one of those two guys is not and has regressed rather severely.
There would have to be something, some setback, somebody, is sore, can't throw the ball, can't play, something just like I said, Gronkowski was dinged up and then he further dinged up, and then that even necessitated bringing Michael Vick in. So I had a little bit of my timeline messed up there. But regardless, I mean, it's rare for even someone like Dustin Vaughn, who was the number 4 that year, to actually get snaps. And then you see what happens. And didn't Dustin Vaughn also get hurt or something happened with his hand? And then they had to replace him too, I think. I think. I mean, preseason football, by the time you get to week 4 of the preseason, as much as I get excited, week 1, I'm glued, I want to watch. And then you're still kind of invested into week 3 because you're like, okay, the starters it's supposed to be dress rehearsal time, right? And week 4, it's like nobody is playing. You're trying to really try and judge or evaluate. I'll take Damone Patterson, for example, last season, who was a preseason superstar, and they've had others in the past, like linebacker Howard Jones and stuff like that. And you just never know where the team is going to go. And neither of those guys actually, made the 53. I think Howard Jones was at least on the practice squad. Damone Patterson got an injury waiving settlement there. So, I mean, it's one of those things where you're trying to evaluate or judge talent. And when I'm watching the week 4 game, I'm like, I really don't know what they're looking at other than just trying to fill 4 quarters of football with some snaps. Because at that point, they're pretty much protecting not only starters now, you're kind of protecting some of the backups too. It all depends because, I mean, if they're young players, it wouldn't surprise me to see Devin Bush out there playing 3 quarters of a week 4 football game this year. But and Terrell Edmonds even to that matter, but you're not going to see TJ Watt out there now, you know what I mean? And even to that regard, you're not going to see Sean Davis or some of these other guys that have been around for a few years. It's usually a very young man's game when it comes to the preseason and guys that are trying to fight for those last couple roster spots or practice squad spots.
Yeah, it is what it is. I've stated this, and I will continue to state it every preseason. I don't actually agree with it because in my mind, what it really does is extends the preseason into the first 2, 3, 4 games of the season. Because you essentially have preseason for everybody that isn't a vet, and then you have preseason for the vets, which count.
Yeah.
And I don't really like it. I would much rather have, the veteran players be playing in the first half of the games and allow the second half of the games to be used for their evaluation. I get it, though. There's always that risk-reward factor of, but what if they get injured in a meaningless game? So I get it. And it is what it is. I don't think we're going to change anything at this point. So, yeah, you're absolutely right. It's the preseason is really designed for evaluating players that are new to the system, players that may have come in as free agents that they don't know very well, obviously rookies that they don't know very well, unsigned player, or, undrafted free agents, what have you. Or for guys who are still trying to grow and need to prove themselves. So the offensive line, because you don't carry 50 offensive linemen, will get some snaps. But, that's just the case. Same thing's true with the defensive line. So there's some positions where you're thin that the starters will get work, and then there's other positions that they just aren't gonna.
Yeah, and you know what? And it shows. I mean, it shows when the season starts, but that's where the guys are getting their paychecks. I mean, it's 17 weeks of paychecks, and when you have somebody like Marquise Pouncey, or I'll even go with the Packers, that same game with Jordy Nelson, pretty much out for the season. You know what I mean? Just these freak injuries, and these are guys you can't just replace. Financially, you can't replace them either. They're eating so much cap space, but as a player on the field and their talent, at least at that time for Jordy Nelson, now he's up there in age too. I'm kind of curious what Jordy Nelson's age is, by the way, since we had this conversation. I know somebody missed it. We were talking, with the Steelers' respect with the last episode, and maybe we didn't get into it with the Antonio Brown thing. Oh, Jordy Nelson, actually. You want to know where he fell off, Brian? The magic 31. Number for him. Absolutely, man. Green Bay. 16 games, so he had 97 receptions, 1,257 yards, 14 TDs. Comes back at age 32, plays all but one game that year, drops from 97 to 53 catches, 1,257 yards to 482, and then only 6 TDs. Now, I understand that's the Aaron Rodgers factor, although we've pretty much trashed him. They had Brett Hundley playing for a lot of time, too, but, I mean, he disappeared there. And then in Oakland last year, moderately better year, but 15 games, 63 catches, 739 yards. Pretty much, he's like on his way out of the league and stuff too. So they just hit that age, man, and that's what we were talking about. So if you didn't catch that, folks, about 3 weeks ago, Brian, we did the wide receiver position group breakdown, and we went into a little more statistics there with like Antonio Brown and replacing production, and how other NFL wide receivers, they have like their last great year is usually at age 31, and that's where Antonio Brown is right now for the 2019 season. So kind of check that out. And this still falls under the topic. Everyone's probably like, geez, man, these guys are like, they've been rattling off for about 10 plus minutes, and what are Steelers fans dwelling on? Well, we dwell on the preseason and we dwell on Antonio Brown. Now, I don't think we need to talk about Antonio Brown a whole lot more, because we got a lot of other topics, and we've dwelled on him enough since January. It's been 6 months of dwelling, right? So if you want to hear more dwelling on Antonio Brown, check out that show. But as far as, I actually had a point for bringing up all the preseason stuff too. We dwell on some of the stupid news and some of the things that come out and the rumors, and it's very, high school-like and very, I don't know, immature at times, some of the things that come out on Twitter and the things that people say. And I think a lot of these are going to resonate with a lot of people, but I'm going back with the preseason real quick, because it's even worse when you see the Hall of Fame game, which is the added fifth game that they force everyone to do. These teams aren't even recognizable. They're like, oh, so-and-so Jim Bob from Wilkes-Barre is the starting quarterback today. And you're like, for, like the Saints or something. And you're like, I've never heard of this guy before. So it's like, where's Drew Brees, And that's usually
the coaches.
Yeah, I know. It's just like, if it's the Steelers, it's like they give Danny Smith the headset for the entire game. Here you go. You're in charge today.
Exactly.
They don't even have Mitchell out there as the assistant coach. He's taking a breather too. Well deserved too, man. That guy's been around forever. He's like the silent. I don't know, the secret weapon maybe. He's the silent guy behind all this. He's been around like through Cowher too, man, like 30-some years in the NFL. It's just crazy, There's guys who do excellent jobs in the NFL that have 30-some odd years or more in the league, and it surprises me at some point, like you don't hear some of these names. Then there's the guys that I'm like, how do they keep getting jobs? They float around everywhere. We brought up Mike Mularkey, a name, a real blast from the past, a tight end in the 80s, Mularkey, or early 90s, somewhere around then. It was pre-Eric Green, I believe. And then Mularkey became the OC under Bill Cowher for a short spell, and he's had head coaching gigs, and he's been all over. I don't even know how many teams he's been with, and some of these guys float back and forth between college and everything. And it's not to say that they're good or whatever, or not good. Some better than others, obviously, or they maybe keep a job a little longer. It depends on the stability of ownership or leadership, depending on where they're at. And, it's just a volatile job overall. I think 80%, 90% of it is volatile, and you expect to be a nomad and travel around unless you really hunker down and get a job and stability like a Mike Tomlin or even like Nick Saban or somebody in Alabama. So we'll be talking about Tomlin too, but just getting back to the preseason type thing, Sean Sweesham, I'm still not over that injury, man. That's one that I dwell on quite a bit. It brought Chris Boswell eventually via having to deal with, guys. Well, Garrett Hartley, he didn't last too long either. And then wasn't that the Josh Scobie experiment before Chris Boswell came in? What's that?
You said exactly what I was going to say. What I dwell on about that is not. I feel bad for Sweesham. Swish was a good kicker, and I liked him. But what I dwell on is that game brought us Josh Scobie, and that lost us games.
It did, and I think we're going to even talk about people dwelling currently. There's a lot of current situations, current events dwelling on different things here. And one of those is definitely Chris Boswell and how many field goals he's made or missed or whatever, So I'm pulling up Boswell's stats just because, this is a good spot. There really isn't a show to put this in overall. He was 16 of 23 last season in field goal attempts overall. Or no, I'm sorry. He was 13 of 20. I'm sorry, because Matt McCrane was on here. I was looking at the overall kicker thing. McCrane went 3 for 3, actually. Yep. So he was at 65%, right? And Sweesham had just gotten a pretty nice, rich contract, and I never thought that he always had the strongest leg. It wasn't like I saw him, booting it out of the end zone, so to speak. But there was a year here with Sweesham where he went 23 of 31. So he was like at 74%-ish. And he was 100% on extra points, unlike, Boswell was not. He missed 5 of them last year, but Sweesham didn't have to kick from the same distance.
Yeah, exactly.
So it just makes me wonder what might have been. Sweesham's last year, he was 33 years old, but that's like an infant when we talk about like ages and the word kid. For a kicker, man, that's like an infant. When you got like Vinatieri, who's like 65 years old and still kicking out there. I kid, but isn't Vinatieri like 45 years old? He's something like that.
907.
Oh, he's 46. Ooh, I was close. I was very close. You know when the age when kickers fall off, Brian?
907.
907. They're going to be the same age as Moses. So, yeah. But yeah, anyway, I always wonder about that. I'm like, how much longer would he have played? He's still very visible, like in the community with Pittsburgh and the Steelers and or with the organization and events and whatnot. And, there's really only touched on 1 or 2 of these things that we dwell on, but that one still kind of bothers me quite a bit. And it also bothers me to not appreciate how good Sweesham or even Boswell, while there's spells where they miss field goals, not at a Josh Scobie level.
Yeah.
So, anyway, as I get a robocall, you get the robocalls, Brian. They're always from my area code, and I'm just like, yeah, right. This isn't like.
my new favorite thing is the spoofed calls, where it looks like I'm getting a call from someone who is a human being.
Yeah.
Bill Spector might be calling me, or who knows, whatever the name is, and it's from a local area code, and then you think to yourself, well, why shouldn't I answer that call? And the reason you shouldn't answer that call is because if you don't know who the heck it is, it probably is not that person. The only good thing that ever happened is Iron Man called me one day.
Oh, that's cool. I only get
I thought that was cool.
I only get car warranties for cars I haven't owned in like 10 years and health insurance. Those are the ones. And sometimes business loans. Yeah, business loans are big too.
Health insurance and energy providers are my 2 big ones.
Man, that's some bugaboo. Sorry for the sidebar, folks, but it's just really annoying. Nothing like getting interrupted by some garbage like that. So anyways, let's see. We could talk about some garbage here. There's 2 garbage things, actually. I guess I'll get the first one out of the way because everybody knows that I was still pounding my fist on this, and I still do, even though he's no longer a Steeler now and he signed with the Lions. But Jesse caught the damn ball, all right? That one really irritates me. And it irritates me for so many reasons. We were just talking about the thing that people really dwell on besides Jesse caught it. The Jesse caught it thing. Okay, the Steelers 13-3, isn't that the record they ended up with in just a year prior in 2017? Yep. And they still end up, they get a bye, but they're second, and they didn't match up well with the Jags. The Jags just had their number. If the referees don't botch this play and this rule isn't so complicated, convoluted, and that's a touchdown, never mind the aftermath where Eli Rogers is basically, removed of his shirt. They beat the Patriots, and people dwell a lot on Patriot losses. I'll get there in a second. But I think it changes the landscape as far as matchups. I don't think the Steelers would have had the same problem with the Titans, and they may have had the same problem if they had to face the Jaguars in, let's say, an AFC championship game. Let's say they won and moved on. But if they play the Patriots, we already saw how they matched up against the Patriots. It would have been toe-to-toe. I'm not saying that they would have won the Super Bowl or anything like that, but the matchup would have been a heck of a lot different. And I still dwell on that because it was an extremely talented team, and I felt like that season just got stolen from them. And part of that, too, is something – this isn't a bad thing to dwell on, but the Ryan Shazier injury definitely impacts that season, and it's something that's still fresh in people's minds. So I don't necessarily want to say dwell on, but I think people more or less, if you're going to take anything from the Shazier situation that they dwell on, is replacing Ryan Shazier, which we may be over the hump. We're going to have to see, but right now, all expectations, all thoughts, everything on paper might be over the hump with drafting Devin Bush.
Yeah, There is no doubt. I still have my Jesse Caught It shirt, and I still wear my Jesse Caught It shirt because Jesse caught it. And it doesn't matter that he's in Detroit and that he got ranked as the most overpaid player in the league or something like that on that team.
God bless him, man.
It doesn't matter. None of it matters. He caught the daggone ball, and much like a variety of things. I'm sure we're going to get told that this is a whining episode where we're whining. But the point is, it's not just us. Steelers fans all over the place dwell on these topics. Yes. And this is another one. And it's particularly annoying because it converges with that whole Patriots thing. Look, if Jesse caught that ball against the Jaguars, and it was, we'd still dwell on it. It would still be a problem for us. But it wouldn't be as much of a problem. It wouldn't hurt quite so bad if it was against almost any other team. The Ravens may be close, but probably still not. And as you said, the repercussions of that call, of that overturned call, the fact that it was the third or fourth call that went in the Patriots' favor that season that Al the Toady Riveron did.
Yeah.
All those things kind of jumble together to make Jesse Caught It a pivotal moment in Steelers history.
Oh, definitely. And I mean, how many times were the Patriots a thorn in the side, the Steelers, not even just recently, but we talk about we were talking to each other about playoff games and particularly AFC title games. How many of those still do people dwell on? I don't know. I was born in 1981, so I don't really get to dwell on losing to the undefeated Miami Dolphins team, back in 1972, or losing. And I mean, you look at the Steelers' record in the 70s, and it's lost the AFC title game, lost the divisional, Super Bowl wins 2 in a row, lost in the AFC, lost divisional, Super Bowl, disappear. 82. They're still competitive. They lose in the playoffs a couple times. They get the AFC title game in 84. Do people still remember or dwell on that? I think there's, even within our own camp, we have a lot of guys that aren't even dwelling on in the 90s, and you know where I'm going, He Who Shall Not Be Named. The most famous of maybe one of the ones to dwell upon. I'm headed there, but does anyone really, actually, this kind of goes in with it. Let's go with 84 because it was the Miami Dolphins, and who was the quarterback of that 84 Dolphins team? Dan Marino. There are people, this is another big one that people still dwell upon very largely in Pittsburgh because he was a Pitt guy. He went to Pitt, and he was there. He was available for the taking, and they passed.
Yeah, I'm going to, I don't know if we're going to talk about the He Who Shall Not Be Named original version, the OG He Who Shall Not Be Named, as far as I'm concerned, later or not, but I'll get back to it. I want to talk about Dan Marino.
Yeah.
Look, people, I don't know how they're going to go around I think even Dan Rooney admitted that was a mistake, that they should never have passed on Dan Marino at that point. And, you feel bad for two things. Look, Dan Marino had a wonderful career with the Dolphins, but how many Super Bowls did he win? None. So, you think, how much better of a career might he have had in Pittsburgh? Would we be worried about the Patriots getting their sixth trophy or not? Because we might have 8 now. Would it have been really that bad? Now, what year did Marino retire? I can't remember now.
I can pull that up in a second. I had my Dan Marino stats not too long ago. 99. Can you imagine
99,
that?
okay.
83 through 99. And since I have it right here, Brian, let me interject that real quick. So the Steelers didn't make the playoffs for 4 years after losing the AFC title game, where they get blown out basically, in the second half with the Dolphins, and Mark Malone throws 3 picks. They make the playoffs 1 out of, 7 years here, up until Bill Cowher takes over in 92. And imagine if Cowher had him between 92 all the way. You're talking about years with He Who Shall Not Be Named and Cordell Stewart and Kent Graham and Mike Tomczak, and I'm sure I'm missing several. The Tommy Gun is in there too, up until Ben. Can you imagine that though? That would have went almost all the way. That would have got you to at least Slash, right? And then Big Ben would have been right around the corner a few years later. That would have been. It would be unbelievable. It would have been a dynasty in the 80s and maybe part of the 90s as well.
Yeah, it just would have made such a big difference. And we go on about what would have been, and I get why we dwell on that. And it's twofold issues for me because of He Who Shall Not Be Named. Because of a Super Bowl that went awry on the arm of He Who Shall Not Be Named, a Super Bowl that nobody thought they could win, that nobody expected them to even be in the game, that everybody at the time just assumed the Cowboys were going to walk away with, and up until the point of a certain interception, it was a game they could have and should have won. It just. I will never ever get over that game.
No, and the year before, we're talking about conference games and stuff. The Patriots they were practically nobodies. They got in here somewhere along the line with Drew Bledsoe as their quarterback. They got into one of the Super Bowls, I think, against Brett Favre and the Packers. But right in that era, you had two teams that it ended up being the Super Bowl. The 94 season was the Chargers and the 49ers. And the two teams that end up playing a year later that lose in the conference games, and that was the Cowboys and Steelers. Of course, He Who Shall Not Be Named. Plug your ears, Brian. Neil O'Donnell is who we're talking about. And, can you believe this, though? They lose against the Chargers. It was a heck of a season for, 1994. They were 12-4. And this is Bill Cowher's third year there, and this team, just think about some of this. Tomczak played a little bit in there, but he had 93 attempts during the year, which was kind of crazy. But this was still, Barry Foster was still plugging around. They just got Bam Morris. They had that dual-headed attack. It was, man, I'm telling you, I love that. I remember. Charles Johnson, Ernie Mills. God, some great guys. Yancey Thigpen, Andre Hastings, Eric Green was still there. He was one of the bright spots for a while there as a Pro Bowl tight end. And so was Gary Anderson for a long time, too. And, Gary Anderson was still part of this team that lost in the AFC title game there against the Chargers for the 94 season. I hate saying just 94 because somebody's going to point out, well, the game was actually played January 15th, 1995 at 12:30 p.m., Eastern Time at Three Rivers Stadium. That's the other thing that sucks. It's you lose a home game and you lose it, 17-13, and they have so much promise. And, you go through all that and you come back around to the next year and the Steelers end up losing to the Cowboys by making Larry Brown a highly paid player in the subsequent offseason. Just that one might be one of the big ones. I've seen people post before on social media, if you could take one thing back in Steelers history, what would you take back? and that is almost overwhelmingly the one they vote for, other than the Dan Marino pick with Gabe Rivera, who had the tragic accident and whatnot, and for all intents and purposes, he looked like a second coming of maybe a Joe Green or something. Joe Green was getting up in age. The pick made sense. You could still justify all of that. Nobody knew that he was going to get, what was it, a car accident or something like that, and it's tragic. The guy was a stud in college, but it's quarterback-driven league, as we always say, and they just, this is something where they think they've turned around on, because you see them take somebody like James Conner, who they have intimate knowledge of. Back then, it was like, are we being too much of homers? And always being scared of being homers, they talked themselves out of what was the obvious. And it's crazy to me, just how it all played out. And, can you imagine Dan Marino with Chuck Noll? I mean, Dan Marino with Don Shula was still good, but Dan Marino back then, who he still had, he would have still had Stallworth for maybe a year or so, and Lewis Lips, and I mean, there was still some, there were still remnants there of the the old guard, so to speak, and then it started to kind of change over, and there were still decent players in the 80s. They just couldn't get over the hump, and I think a lot of that was quarterback play, Bubby Brister or Mark Malone or whoever you throw out there, and they still got some of it done with Mark Malone. They got all the way to the title game. So you put those two up there, and I think anyone who's listening and ends up commenting, I don't know what you would pick outside of those two as the main thing that Steelers fans dwell on.
Yeah, it's funny because the Marino one, if you could go back and change that, you realistically probably change the other one. So it's kind of, but they're the two. I mean, because it was in the Super Bowl, it's like everything is still speculative with a Marino pick, right? You just don't know. But you can make assumptions based on the career that he had, but again, you don't know how he would develop under Noll versus Shula. You don't know how he would develop, in a different system that may have been less, high flying than what did you have, the Duper twins or whatever it was down there, Super Dupers.
Clayton,
I don't remember.
Clayton and Duper,
triplets.
I think.
Yeah. Three guys, whatever they were called. I don't remember. And so you never know. But the Super Bowl was real. It was concrete. And the fact that, that guy left and ran away the next year.
That's the worst.
Was even worse because you didn't get the chance to boo the crap out of him.
Or redeem himself either. And
or redeem himself and do it again, yeah.
That's one of the oddest situations too, because I want to say Bubby Brister, we were talking about how the Jets pick up everyone. Just a show ago, we were talking about like Bell and Danian Tomlinson and everything. They had Boomer Esiason at one point. They had I think they had Bubby Brister at one point. They may have had them all at the same time, I think. Okay, so when He Who Shall Not Be Named ends up going there, he plays like 6 games, and he was just pretty much terrible. He threw 4 TDs to 7 picks. They were resigned to playing. He started 6 games. They had Frank Reich as well, who is now 35 years old, versus He Who Shall Not Be Named, 30. So people know who we're saying. When He Who Shall Not Be Named is ever named on the show, Brian's not allowed to say his name. I feel like it's like a Beetlejuice thing. If I say O'Donnell 3 times, he's going to reappear. And
Stop.
He's going to.
That's 2.
He's going to. Yeah, I know. It's getting close. He's going to throw the ball past me, and Larry Brown's going to be somewhere to catch it. They have. Remember Glenn Foley? Nobody probably does, but he was there. I mean, He Who Shall Not Be Named lasted 2 years with the Jets after signing that big free agent contract where he skipped out of town, and he had an okay year there, and then he ended up bouncing around, and he actually had 11 starts for the Bengals in '98, and then he pretty much he ended up in Tennessee I think they were Tennessee already. The Oilers / Titans franchise from like 99 to 03, and more or less started to fade into oblivion as a backup quarterback. And it's kind of the sweet sour type thing too, with he could have been a hero, you know what I mean? And it was like the best. It was the best that the Steelers had for so long as far as a quarterback. Now, when they did go to the Super Bowl, the big thing that came out of that was Slash, and Slash was larger than life. They were putting him on video game boxes and Wheaties boxes and everything. He's a quarterback playing wide receiver, and then they start to try and toy with letting him play quarterback. But it was, you know who I forgot in this? I was looking at 96. Tom, Zach, and Jim Miller, as well as Slash being there. So they never recovered from that for the longest time, and just AFC title games, and aside from the Patriots and stuff, I mean, wasn't Cordell the one who threw? I'm trying to pull this up too. Was that 01 where he threw a bunch of interceptions against our friends the Patriots? Yeah, it was the game where he went. He had a 45.2 QB rating. He got sacked 3 times, more or less because he's a mobile guy too. So some of that's overblown. But the 3 picks were real bad. 24 or 42, just not very strong. This was also where Tom Brady was starting to ascend and was splitting time with Drew Bledsoe, who had been hurt, and Brady had just kind of become the new shiny toy, as we always talk about. And that was on the way to that Patriots team winning that Super Bowl against the Rams that season too. So it's just, they come in and win the AFC title game after. This should have never happened to begin with, because a week earlier there was all the snow where the Patriots played at home against the Raiders, that Raiders team that was very solid with Rich Gannon and the tuck rule and everything else. That was the one. And that's where Tom Brady, starts to come in. I do believe. I don't think I have my seasons mixed up. I think that's the proper year there. And it's just, you could tell I'm like still sour about it because it leaves me almost speechless. The 2000 New England Patriots were 5-11. I mean, they were terrible. You know what I mean? And speaking of Jets, that's where Bill Belichick had that job for like one day, and then skated out of town. You know what I mean? It's funny how, but I'm going to be ragging on the Jets all season, maybe, just because I think about how they had Pete Carroll too, I believe, as a coach at one time, and only won one game. So we're talking about AFC Championship games and losing to opponents and things like that, and what else can we talk about postseason? This one's really bad. I hate saying the name Tim Tebow, and that's about all the more I need. All I need to wound the soul.
Yeah, it's again. I have one that I'm going to save because I don't think it's as impactful because they won the game in the end. But it was one that the game would never have come down to what it came down to if it had stood. But most of these that you notice are because they end in a loss, right?
Yes.
The loss, of course, makes it much worse. And this is a game where, look, if you're a Tebow fan, that's fine. I was never a Tim Tebow fan. I never thought he was going to be a starting NFL quarterback. And for my beloved Steelers to lose in a playoff game to him, still to this day, irks me.
Yeah, it really does.
I'm sorry that Ike was bumped off of the coverage or whatever happened, but there was nothing worse. Well, it was so bad.
It was the Mile High, the sickle cell thing with Ryan Clark. Ryan Clark didn't play at all. So they had another safety in there. Might have been Mundy, maybe Ryan Mundy.
Can't remember.
I believe he was starting in place of Ryan Clark, and they knew that. And you had Demaryius Thomas, and everything was tailored. It was very smart by John Fox. The way he I watched a lot of those Broncos games by virtue of Red Zone or the Sunday Ticket thing. It's being that they're in Mountain Time a lot of times, they were the other game that was on, and the Tebow mania started to take over, and they were winning games, with field goals at the end and being competitive, and he tailored everything to that strength. The Tebow mania went on, and as soon as that was put up on the marquee as the team you had to play, I'm like, that's the team I don't want to play, because you get these teams that are streaky, and I'm usually able to call it. And unfortunately, in this case, I called it. In years past, I called the Giants. I remember the Giants ended up like smacking the Packers or something. They were hot going right into the postseason and ended up beating the unbeaten Patriots in the Super Bowl. And I remember that reminding me very much so of the same way the Steelers with the Jerome Bettis team were the 6th seed and were very hot at the end of the year. The Chargers were starting to look like that last year too. So you get these teams that are very kind of streaky, and winning is infectious, and everything's just clicking and they're hot, and it's an intangible factor that you can't compete against. And that was the Tebow thing, plus the new OT rule. I mean, it was meant so Tebow didn't just have to dink and dunk and get them, within like a 60-yard field goal range in that stadium, which is almost automatic because of the Mile High. And it was just like one of those things where it's like, oh crap, the very first play, and it was like a quick slant or something like that, and just attacked, having, not having your full personnel in there and being tired because of the Mile High atmosphere, and it being in overtime. And that one really hurts, because that's when the team kind of fell from grace here for, a couple of years and went with some 8-8 seasons and missed the playoffs and things of that nature. That was like the last remnants of, Casey Hampton, and all those guys all being healthy and or playing on the field together, James Harrison, Polamalu, Ryan Clark, and all that, because then it started to kind of disband and almost into a rebuild from there. Yeah,
it was the game that broke the Steelers, so to speak. It broke that team that had just won a Super Bowl essentially. And was this dominant defense. And it was, I feel like it's really kind of where the Steelers started to get this perception that they couldn't hold leads, and that, the fans started to be less comfortable at the end of games when the defense was on the field. It changed your outlook on things for a while. There's no question about it.
I hated that feeling, because it was like for years it was like, the offense really struggled. You look back at some of the offenses that they had even in the Super Bowl appearances, and it was like Jeff Reed field goal, Troy Polamalu pick six, and you had, like 30 sacks between like Woodley and Harrison, or whoever the other bookend was when Woodley wasn't there, and stuff like that. And, that's another guy that I bring up as part of that great defense, because even though, he was younger then, he ended up he got the contract, he got hurt, and then was like just always hurt and just never lived up to the same potential as when he entered the league. So, I mean, It's another guy that often that people often forget about. There's not a whole lot left on the list. I'm going to bring up a quick hitter here. As far as, I think people I didn't bring up Bell. I think people will less dwell on him for a while. I think Antonio Brown has kind of stolen the spotlight from him as far as his antics and sitting out and stuff like that. I want to say Mike Wallace is one that people won't forget anytime soon either. There's certain levels of forgiveness. I think people have already started to forgive James Harrison to some degree, and we've already seen him come back and be welcomed back for some events and things like that. Yeah. So players exiting like that, I don't know. But one guy I think that will always be a public enemy number one, and it doesn't matter where he's at, where he's playing, as long as he's still in the NFL and he's lined up on the other side of the field, is going to be Vontaze Burfict. I think that I'm still going to dwell on every single dirty, cheap shot that has ever happened to one of the players, like knocking Antonio Brown out, or, I know it wasn't necessarily him, but Bell getting hurt and things like that. Those are all still going to bother me. And I know Bengals fans still dwell on, what was that, chemo on Carson Palmer in the playoffs? Yeah. And, there's going to be two sides to every story. They still dwell on Huber, the punter, getting smacked by Terrence Garvin and getting his jawbreaker. Hey, there you go. There you go. Terrence Garvin and Bryony Roach, the jawbreakers. See, tag team. See, all comes full circle. So, there's certain players like that. I don't know. Do you have any other players you would add to the dwell on list? There are certain Raiders players from back in the day, but now you're talking way old school. That every time you see them, you just kind of go, I just want to smack that guy, and you remember them,
if you watched those games, right? More recently, I think Burfict is the perfect choice because he's just got involved in so many things. Many people will tell you that hit on Antonio Brown may have cost the Steelers yet another chance at a Super Bowl, because then they had to go to Denver and play without, Brown and with an injured Ben. So I don't know, but I'll tell you the one that I was hinting at.
Okay,
and it is if a certain quarterback doesn't make a certain shoestring tackle.
Oh yeah, I thought that's what you were going to say.
In this game, then this interception that wasn't an interception, if I'm remembering this correctly, I'm pretty sure it was that game, would have been something that we would have, and people still dwell on the fact that Polamalu intercepted Peyton Manning and it was overruled.
Yes. That is one of the most egregious calls of all time. That's worse than Jesse caught it.
Yeah, that may be the origin of the refs suck or stink or whatever I tend to say. That may be the first time I really, really emitted it from my soul. But because it was so bad. And, the bottom line is they end up winning the game. So it's easy to kind of go, okay, no harm, no foul. But it was so bad. And because it's another interception Troy should have had, and it would have been a game-changing thing. So, it would have added to his legacy and his legend, which is why it bothers me. But they won. So, okay, maybe I should let it go, but I can't.
No, and you know what? There's one just recently where they lost, where it may have changed the fortunes of last season. Maybe they at least get in the playoffs, even though they didn't deserve it, and for a variety of other reasons, the season had fallen apart. But that is the Joe Hayden pass interference call on Alvin Kamara nobody cared about until you got to was it the Vikings and Saints game, or with the blatant pass interference that wasn't called there. Now all of a sudden it's like everybody saw it, but everybody saw that like earlier, and I think it just started to tally. There were other bad calls as well throughout the season with that, just as bad as the catch rule. So it's just the Joe Hayden thing is that's still fresh in my mind. I don't know how much that changes the 2018 season, but it definitely had it has an impact going forward, because now these calls are reviewable, and you look at it, how many years in a row? This is why people dwell on this. This isn't just being homers or biased or crying or whatever. Jesse caught it. They say he didn't. They changed the catch rule. Joe Hayden gets called for pass interference that wasn't pass interference, and then you have the debacle with the Vikings-Saints game as well, and they changed the rule. Come on. Yeah. Hello. This is the reason we dwell on it. There's one more, Brian, because we're getting up against it here, is people still dwell on Bill Cowher. And it was just even talking about this, and I troll people a lot of times with different things, because they always say, Mike Tomlin's player or Bill Cowher's players, Mike Tomlin inherited them. To some degree, yes. Ben Roethlisberger, Troy Polamalu, these are legendary players. There's no mistake about it. But, where has Tomlin been when he hasn't had Ben? He's still been a 500 coach with guys like Vic or Landry Jones or Byron Leftwich or Charlie Batch. And yes, please, we talked about Charlie before. We all love Charlie. He's a hometown hero type guy. But 500 quarterback at best. You go back and look at some of his games, and if he didn't have those defenses with Troy and those guys, he got bailed out. I mean, he had one big game, I think, against the Buccaneers, and then he also had some lousy games where he threw a bunch of picks, or there was the one up in Cleveland the one year where it was like 7-8 turnovers just on the Steelers side of the ball. I think it was like 13 turnovers in the entire game. It was just a disaster. So, a lot of people still dwell on Bill Cowher, but we were talking about losing, in the playoffs and having these high expectations. Cowher's no less guilty than Mike Tomlin of that, and Cowher had a few seasons that were flops too, especially after just appearing in a Super Bowl.
Yeah, the one with Cowher's players storyline falls apart because Cowher went 8-8 with those same players the year before.
Yeah,
I get it. I know about the contract. I know about all the other things where Cowher may not have been giving his full effort because he wanted more than he got in contract negotiations. So he just played out his contract, didn't sign a new deal. I get it. I get all that stuff. But nonetheless, he went 8-8 with the same players. So it's beyond saying he only won with Cowher's players. He took Cowher's players and got them to play better. And made them Mike Tomlin's players.
Well, yeah. You know what really bothers me about that is that 8-8. Well, Cowher didn't really. He's not going to sabotage his season or his legacy, or they just were in a Super Bowl. Maybe it was just the hangover, but you can't tell me that Ben was playing any less than he did. You can't tell me that Willie Parker, who made the Pro Bowl that year, almost ran for 1,500 yards, was any worse. Hines Ward, legendary guys like this. Santonio Holmes, who ends up being a Super Bowl MVP a couple years later under Tomlin because he was a rookie. He didn't play a whole lot. It just really bothers me. And a lot of these guys, that was the other thing too, is a lot of the guys that make these arguments aren't realizing when you stack up. Look at the Steelers roster 3 years ago. It's not the same as it's going to be heading into 2019 and 3 years before that or 2 years before that. So saying it's like Cowher's players, there's a core of a few guys, right? Like Ben, Heath, and Troy. Those are your number one draft picks. Whoever ends up coming in for Tomlin would inherit Tomlin's players too. They may make a change or spin, but a lot of the linebackers in the secondary and even, James Harrison was on the team, but he wasn't playing. It was Joey Porter or Clark Haggans was in there. And there was a lot of turnover, and there was a lot of turnover from 2008 to 2010. I know this will get a lot of comments flaming things in there, and I'm not really trying to make a comparison between one or the other. They both have their strengths and weaknesses, whether it's Cowher or Tomlin. It's just, this is a thing that people still dwell on as though, Bill Cowher would have coached for 30 consecutive years in the NFL and still led the Steelers to the promised land after all this, you know what I mean? It's just, he had his faults, Tomlin's had his faults, both have won, both have lost. It's very rare to win in the NFL. That's why it's the NFL. That's why it's a professional league. That's why there's parity. That's why you see teams that didn't make the playoffs the year before end up in the postseason and all these other things that are attached to it. Just please sit and enjoy the ride because we don't know where it's going in a few years.
Yeah, it may be going back to the Kent Graham.
Jim Miller. Jim Miller was the guy I didn't mention. Yeah, Jim Miller.
Yeah, Jim Miller days, and those are some bad days.
Those weren't as bad, at least, because they were still, it was competitive and very strong defense. And,
yes.
but that's not today's NFL. It doesn't work the same way. You just can't throw Bam Morris in the backfield or have Willie run for 1,500 yards. I mean, I could see Connor maybe doing something like that. It's the Steelers' way of doing that is even just the one running back, as we pointed out in the running back show, is, kind of not the trend anymore. And the offense is now, it's 3 and 4 wide receivers, and, a 3-4 defense just doesn't, it has to evolve, and they play a lot of sub packages and things of that nature. And people are always dwelling on the coaches, whether it's Tomlin or Cowher or any of the assistants. Todd Haley, before Todd Haley was Bruce Arians, and then when Bruce Arians left and they didn't like Haley, all of a sudden Arians was a god. And it was just, no, you didn't like that guy when he was here either. So it doesn't matter who's there. We mentioned so many of the other guys. I think the only guy they never really complained about was Wisenhunt, and we talk about bouncing around in a volatile league. He's had a lot of jobs since too. So since being one of Cowher's OCs, so there's all kinds of stuff like that, and I'm sure there's others we may have overlooked, but I think we hit the main ones. And if you got any more, leave them in the comments section. Don't forget to also like and subscribe to the show. And Brian, any closing thoughts on anything else you want to dwell on or tell people to get off your lawn about?
No, I really just want to say again how much we appreciate you guys checking in, listening, giving us the feedback. Feel free to give us topics, because as we've said, it's going to be slow over the next month and a half until training camp starts. Something you want to hear us talk about, let us know. We'll talk about it. We got stuff on the agenda, but if there's something you've got that burning need to hear about something. I don't even know what. But let us know. We'll talk about it. And if you haven't hit the subscription, think about doing so. Turn the bell on. Get notified when we get stuff up there. And thanks for tuning in.
Yeah, and we should point out to anyone that's new, because there's a lot of new subscribers out there. Not only do we appreciate you, but it gets really crazy when we start to get into the season. We almost have shows like every day, so there's something for everyone, and it just won't be your normal flair here as far as, the general variety things, talk about things in the past and stuff like that. But as fans, we're very passionate. We love our team, and these are always fun things to talk about in the off season, and a better time because there's nothing else going on. So anyways, Brian, thanks once again for joining me.
Thank you, sir. And I'm sure I'll join you again soon.
Very soon indeed. So enjoy some of the weather. I think it's finally stopping. The rain's finally going to stop in certain parts of the United States and get very hot.
Too damn hot.
So, well, I guess there's nothing else to say other than to tell our listeners the usual. This is the thing we tell everyone. We want to see everyone be safe, be good, and we'll catch you later.
We would like to thank you for listening and remind our listeners to follow us on social media and our website, www.steelcityunderground.com.